March 6, 1857. The Dred Scott Decision. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott decision to deny citizenship and constitutional rights to all black people, legally establishing the race as subordinate, inferior beings, whether being slave or freedman.
January 1st, 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Lincoln freed slaves in the Confederacy. During the Civil War, one of the largest issues at the time was slavery in the South. In a single stroke, it changed the federal legal status of more than 3 million enslaved persons in the designated areas of the South from slave to free. December 6, 1865. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution abolishes slavery. The national officiation of the end of slavery after World War II. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
July 9, 1868. The 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment provided due process and equal protection under the law to African Americans.
Essentially, this amendment says that anyone born or naturalized in the U.S. is a citizen, and that the government cannot discriminate against its citizens. To this day, lawyers, judges, and lawmakers fight over what constitutes privileges or immunities, and how far the equal protection of the laws extend.
February 3rd, 1870. The 15th Amendment is adopted. The 15th Amendment gave blacks, including former slaves, the right to vote. It was ratified on this date, but was not recognized for over a century.
March 1st, 1875. Congress passed the Third Civil Rights Act in response to many white business owners and merchants who refused to make their facilities and establishments equally available to black people. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 prohibited such cases of racial discrimination and guaranteed equal access to public accommodations regardless of race or color. White supremacist groups, however, embarked upon a campaign against blacks and their white supporters.
1948, Executive Order 9981. President Truman signs Executive Order 9981, which states, "It is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services, without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin." This eventually led to the end of segregation in the armed forces. One of the most famous groups of African Americans in the military were the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were a group of African American pilots during World War II, and they were the first African American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces.
More and more black pilots were proving their ability to fly, but the U.S. military would still not let them fly for their country.
The Negro is physically qualified for combat duty, but he is by nature subservient
and believes himself to be inferior to the white man. He has not the initiative and resourcefulness of the white man.
African Americans in military were only allowed and relegated to subordinate roles, cooks, cleaners, etc.
But just before the outbreak of the U.S. entry into World War II, you have blacks who are saying, wait a minute, and we want to fly, we want to participate. A black fighter pilot seems to go contrary to the notion that African Americans are inferior and that fighter pilots are the best of the best.
Nazi Germany represented racism on a monstrous scale. In America, black leaders put pressure on the government to prove its founding principles of democracy and justice for all.
So what they decided to do was to create an all-black base and train an all-black squadron. And Tuskegee, the historic Tuskegee Institute, was selected as the base, and they built a base there and began training in 1941.
For the first time, the military allowed black pilots to train for combat. The military set a high bar for acceptance into Tuskegee. Those who got in were smart and experienced.
Most of the people who make the initial cuts to be Tuskegee Airmen, these are people who could already fly.
So those who got their wings were skilled pilots ready for combat. But not everyone thought they were ready.
They said it was an experiment and later learned that they fully expected it to fail. So we were putting our best foot forward.
For years they trained, but did not deploy. Finally, with black leaders continuing to pressure the military, the Tuskegee Airmen were sent to Europe as bomber escorts in 1943. By the end of the war, the Tuskegee Airmen had proven their mettle. They were disciplined, accomplished pilots.
(1954) Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. This was a United States Supreme Court case in which the court declared state laws establishing separate public schools for black and white students to be unconstitutional. The decision overturned the Plessy v. Ferguson decision of 1896, which did allow state-sponsored segregation insofar as it applied to public education.
(1955) Rosa Parks refuses to stand. Rosa Parks is one of the most influential and well-known members of the civil rights movement, all because she refused to get up from her seat on a bus. At this time, Parks was the secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP.
January 10th, 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Martin Luther King, Charles K. Steele, and Fred L. Shuttleworth established the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Basic decisions made by the founders of this organization included the use of nonviolent mass action, the affiliation of local community organizations with the SCLC across the South, and a decision to make the SCLC movement open to all, regardless of race. The SCLC is still around today and is a nationwide organization that works to further the human rights movement for all different types of people. 1957. Little Rock 9. In 1954, the Supreme Court issued the Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. This stated that all laws endorsing segregation in schools is unconstitutional. This also called for the desegregation of schools all across the country. After this decision, the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, attempted to register black students in previously all-white schools in cities throughout the South. The Little Rock School Board in Little Rock, Arkansas, agreed to comply with the Brown v. Board of Education ruling. In 1957, the NAACP registered 9 African American students to attend a previously all-white school in Little Rock. In the first year, the Little Rock 9 faced severe abuses.
1962. James Meredith becomes the first black student to enroll at the University of Mississippi. Violence and riots surrounding the incident caused President Kennedy to send 5,000 federal troops.
September 15th, 1963. Bombing on Birmingham. A bomb exploded before Sunday services at a predominantly black church in Birmingham, Alabama. 4 young girls were killed and many other people were left injured. This incident helped draw national attention to an extremely difficult fight for civil rights.
Mother dear, may I go downtown instead of out to play and march the streets of Birmingham in a freedom march today? No, baby, no, you may not go, for the dogs are fierce and wild, and clubs and hoses, guns and jails aren't good for a little child. But mother, I won't be alone. Other children will go with me and march the streets of Birmingham to make our country free. No, baby, no, you may not go, for I fear those guns will fire. But you may go to church instead and sing in the children's choir. She has combed and brushed her night dark hair and bathed rose petals sweet and drawn white gloves upon her small brown hands and white shoes on her feet. The mother smiled to know her child was in the sacred place, but that smile was the last smile to come upon her face. For when she heard the explosion, her eyes grew wet and wild. She raced through the streets of Birmingham, calling for her child. She clawed through bits of glass and brick, then lifted out a shoe. Oh, here's the shoe my baby wore. But baby, where are you?
1963. Martin Luther King Jr. is arrested and jailed during the anti-segregation protests in Birmingham, Alabama. Martin Luther King Jr., an American Baptist minister and public speaker, is arguably the most famous member of the civil rights movement. One of his values was the idea of peaceful protest and humanitarianism, and served as the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Tired, Ralphie. Tiring of this.
Eyes on the prize, Martin.
Yeah, but what is the prize, friend? We fight to have a seat at whatever table we want. How does it help a black man to be able to eat at a lunch counter if he doesn't earn enough to buy the burger? Or worse yet, can't even read the menu because there was no Negro school where he's from. What is that? Is that equality?
Amen.
And what about in our minds? Equality in the black psyche. I mean, look at these men. Beaten and broken down for generations. Deciding to demand more? What happens when a man stands up, says enough is enough?
August 28, 1963, the March on Washington. More than 200,000 Americans gathered in Washington, D.C. for a political rally known as the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Organized by a number of civil rights and religious groups, the event was designed to shed light on the political and social challenges African Americans continue to face across the country. During this time, Dr. Martin Luther King stood in front of the crowd and made one of the most famous speeches in history. I have a dream.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
1964. President Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President Johnson famously televised this signing. This act was the biggest legislation passed by Congress since the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. The Civil Rights Act prohibited racial discrimination in employment and education and outlawed racial segregation in public places like schools, buses, parks, and swimming pools. This bill also laid the groundwork for many other pieces of legislation. One such piece of legislation that it helped was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which made very strict rules for protecting the voting rights of African Americans.
Each generation has been equal to that trust. Americans of every race and color have died in battle to protect our freedom. Americans of every race and color have worked to build a nation of widening opportunities. Now, our generation of Americans has been called on to continue the unending search for justice within our own borders. We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment.
1965. Malcolm X is shot to death. Malcolm X was an American Muslim minister and human rights activist. He was assassinated by 3 members of the Nation of Islam.